Welcome everybody. Today is the first and the pilot episode of our new podcast, which we will be calling Life in Apparel. For this podcast, we hope to achieve a more educational and a more practical set of advice for how to dress properly in the modern world and how to explore classical menswear in a systematic and fulfilling and fun way that might be very daunting to someone just getting into it. We hope to also include a little bit of humor. This is a very basic.
That's what I'm here for.
This is a very basic setup that we have right now. This is just our first, attempt, because we really feel like we have a lot to say, and we want to help educate young people in particular on how to affordably and practically build a wardrobe that stands the test of time and builds your self-esteem.
A lot of young people, especially, they'll be interested in the way I dress, the way you dress, and they'll comment on it, and they say, "Oh, I wish I could dress this way," and you can. And it might be scary for people who've never looked into that, but that's what we're here. We want to kind of give our input, our experiences, give some tips about what we think you should consider when you're trying to, get into this.
Yeah, and so to kind of start things off, I'll introduce, so my name is Maxwell, and I'm 30 years old now, but I've been wearing suits pretty much every day for the last 11 years. And a lot of it has come not just by trial and error, but as I like to say, error and error, just, making mistakes here and there and experimenting with lots of things until I've finally come to settle on a particular style that I like. And also learning that style has informed every aspect of my life and the way that I treat other people and the way that I conduct myself. That I've really come to believe, and this is sort of my mantra, that your fashion is a statement of your philosophy, or your philosophy of life. And I really do believe that. And we're also
This is me,
Keller.
My name is Keller. I'm something like 17 years old now. I'm still in high school. I'm a junior. I'm not as experienced in dressing like this as Mr. Max here is, but I've been dressing in a suit for every day for a couple of years now. And I'm really thankful to have people like Max who kind of pave the way for me and make less errors upon errors. Have some more advice, and that's kind of what we're here to do. We want to give an example of what we've done before.
Exactly, and don't worry, the production value will increase as time goes on. This is our first attempt, and I was kind of inspired to do this, to join Keller in this venture of doing something more educational. I was very surprised when I first met him to see the way that he was dressing, because in the early 2010s, style was very different than what it's now slowly becoming. And I was one of the very few people that elected to wear a suit, particularly a three-piece ensemble and a tie, every day. And I did it for reasons that were very different than what a lot of young people I've noticed, especially Generation Z, are wanting. And I've kind of perceived that a lot of young people, especially those of you who may be watching now, are desiring a form of dress that harkens back to a golden age of elegance and culture and manners that we don't really see very much in our day-to-day lives now.
And I think that kind of ties back into a lot of, especially younger people now, are really interested in dressing the way we do. I mean, we get comments about it all the time. Even in my school, my dad will always be like, "How do you dress like this at school and not get bullied?" Right? But it's the opposite. Everyone loves it. Everyone, the teachers, the students, every clique in the school, they're all really interested in it, and they ask questions. And we'll get into it maybe later this episode or down the line in the series, but we both started dressing like this for very different reasons than we do it now. And it really is kind of like a journey. And I'll give you a little hint, and maybe we'll get into it now or later. But Mr. Max here, Max, started getting into it kind of as a little rebellion. I started getting into it for kind of similar reasons, just to look nice. And now we do it because it's just the way we live. And it, like Max said, it impacts the way we think, the way we treat people, and most importantly, I would say, is the way we treat ourselves.
That's a very good point. And, just a little bit more background about myself. So I grew up in a very loving family, but it didn't have these sorts of things in our everyday life. They just never occurred to any of us, just to wear a t-shirt and shorts. And that was perfectly fine to just wear every day. And, legally speaking, that is in fact fine to wear every day, but I kind of wanted to elevate my life. When I, came into manhood, I wanted to be able to express my manhood in a new and dignified way, and really the suit was kind of part of that. It was a reaction against sort of the culture that I was living in. Not to say anything bad about my family, but it's just I wanted something more elegant.
And I think that's a pretty good summary of what we want this series, this podcast, whatever to call it, what we want it to be. There's a lot of platforms on the internet that have kind of similar ideas about dressing nicer, but a lot of them do it in very different ways. We are focusing on making it educational. We want to show you our experiences, give you pave the way for you to investigate it yourself in a meaningful way. A lot of these other things on the internet that'll tell you how to dress,
Well, here's an example of what we will hope to be educating you on. So, for example, the clothes that we're wearing now. So Keller, for example, he is wearing an entirely vintage ensemble, with the exception of his shirt, but his waistcoat, coat, pant, and necktie are all vintage items. There's nothing wrong with wearing vintage, and in fact, it's one of the most beautiful parts about embracing classical menswear, because you're giving a garment a new life, and you're continuing its story. For me, I'm wearing a suit that I had custom made a long time ago that barely fits anymore, but I'm still trying to make it work. And but you can see how, for example, my clothing has a great deal of longevity. I've had the suit for 8 years, and I've worn it very frequently. And Keller has a suit here, parts of which are, 40, 50 years old. And so that's a way, to make things accessible to you as the viewer, if you want to start dressing like this. And we'll give you the information, the tips and tricks of how to do that. And be sure that you're obtaining quality.
And so, again, this first episode here is just a pilot. It's an introduction. Eventually we're going to get really into the history and, different parts of the suit. One such example is you'll see we're sitting here with the bottom button of our waistcoat unbuttoned. That's because we're sitting. And there's a history of why that's a thing. If we stand up, we're going to button this bottom button, unless it's an English cut waistcoat, which eventually we'll get into, right?
Specific,
but this episode here, but one sort of such thing that I think is really beautiful about the reason why we dress this way is, as Max was saying, it preserves garments. It's really history. Max gave me a 1880s, sleeved waistcoat. It's hundreds of years old.
Bellhop jacket.
Bellhop jacket, right? And it's wild. Maybe one of these episodes will bring it down and, show you.
Oh, yeah, of course. We'll have showcases and fun things like that.
But, that's hundreds of years old, and it's beautiful. Just to look at that and feel the fabric and say, wow, this feels like totally different fabric because it was made differently back then, and it's been preserved and it's alive, and it's amazing.
And this is something that we don't appreciate in our modern world. We have a lot of distractions, and there's a lot of impermanence about the way that we live. Think about the news cycle. Something happens, the next week it's completely forgotten. But people in the past, all the way up until I would say probably the 1970s, they had far fewer distractions, and their clothing was a very big part of their everyday life. And they cared for it, and they curated it, and it said a lot about who you were in society, and said a lot about your character. And like with this bellhop jacket that we found, it has such a beautiful story about, paying attention to very small details.
And you can look at it and figure out where it's from. It's Parisian. You can see the stamps of the hotel it was worked for, right?
Yes, barely, but you can still see them.
You can see the story just by looking at it and examining it on the inside of the lining, and you can see where it's been worn and things like that. Even just looking at the size, people were smaller back then, and it shows. Right? It's a very, very small thing. I can barely even squeeze into it, and I'm tiny. We'll have a picture of it up on the screen. I'll edit that in, right here. But it's really wonderful, and I think that this series is going to emphasize so many beautiful things that a lot of people don't recognize. A little bit more about ourselves. We've both worked in clothing retail. We have sold suits to quite a great extent, both of us.
Much to our delight.
And we've seen everything with customers. They'll come in. Some of them are very elegantly dressed. They have such a refined taste, and they know exactly what we want, and we help them out. And they walk out happy. Other people come in and they're clueless. They've never had to wear a suit. They don't know what to look for, and we'll kind of guide them. Sometimes the interactions are a little bit less positive than that. But hopefully, if people find this interesting, and I hope they will, you'll have an insight on maybe how you want to dress. I think one of the goals that at least I have with this is I want to not tell you as the audience how to dress. I want to inform you through our ideas and experiences, and convince you to want to dress this way. Because I really think that a lot of men, especially any men who dress this way, will be happier. It has a lot to do with self-respect and
And so what are the things that are different, here in our little enterprise is different for what we're doing and what you have on some of the larger platforms. We're not going to be hawking products, okay? That's not the idea, and that's not the goal. But a lot of your early access to information about classical menswear is going to be bespoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see someone getting fitted for a $6,000 to $8,000 bespoke suit. That is entirely unreasonable for the average person, and it's really not necessary for the average person, right? They'll say, "Oh, if it's not bespoke, it's garbage." Well, that's not true. That's absolutely not true.
And look at us, we're dashing today, right?
I like to think so. But also, things can be very ethereal, and for me, I was a history teacher for a period of time and student of history, and when you learn the history of the suit, that's going to be a very important part, because we're going to be talking not just about the history of the suit. What is the suit? What is each individual part, and where does it come from? You start to understand it in a more holistic way, rather than just, well, if you're going to an evening event, this is what you wear, a tuxedo, and there isn't really any context or rhyme or reason why you would wear something like that, or why something should fit the way it does. And you'll start to appreciate the way fashion changes over time is in large part a reflection of the attitudes of the age in which you find those fashions. So, for example, the 70s. Keller has seen some of my pieces from the 1970s. I plan on wearing one for the videos. It's a very interesting period of time. So, for example, this is called the lapel. The lapel is very, very wide in the 70s. The pants have big flares on them. And it's all about a man being expressing himself. And it's flamboyant. You can say flamboyant. He's expressing himself, and he's expressing his creativity in a dashing way. Like the flared pants actually come from sailors in the Navy. The sailor coming home to port after this wild adventure, all these sorts of things. And then you get to, say, the 2010s, early 2020s, just after COVID, and not too dissimilar to the cut of the suit I'm wearing right now, very, very slim. And what does that usually indicate? It indicates we have this emphasis on youth and this boyishness, and playfulness, and it's smaller and tighter. Those all kind of play into a holistic thing, and we're going to help to kind of teach you how to navigate that.
And it's interesting to appreciate that these changes happen for a reason. For example, the 70s was a correction from the fashion from the 60s, which came blah blah blah, and the 70s became very expressive because a lot of tailored menswear at the time in the 60s was very dull and simple. And you can observe that these changes happen and appreciate them and see why they changed. And it's really interesting to appreciate that.
And it will all be in service later on, so that you would be able to see a garment and be able to identify its history. That's a very important thing too, because Keller and I are huge thrifters for vintage, and we're not we don't just buy clothing just to buy it. We really sift through and find the real gems. But you have to be able to identify when was this garment made, and what purpose did it serve, and you would be able to by following our kind of lessons how to do all those sorts of things.
Absolutely. And so one big thing, one motif that we're going to harp on a lot is the value of the traditions that form all of these garments, all the characteristics and details of these garments. Tradition is a really, really huge part of it, because when you think about it, a suit looks this way for a reason. It's been tailored, see what I did there, for hundreds of years to look good and complement the forms of a man, the features of a man. Even, people sometimes ask me, they'll bring it up in a conversation like, what's the point of a tie? And we can tell you what the point of a tie is. We'll get there in some of these episodes. The tie serves a purpose with the collar. It ultimately frames the face and the features of the face. And
you know what I thought it was originally? So when I was Keller's age, and my father never learned to tie a necktie, and neither did his father. His father was a sailor in the Navy. They never had to wear ties. And when I first had to learn how to tie a necktie, I taught myself. I thought, maybe they started wearing ties because it kept the shirt together. Completely irrespective of the fact that the shirt has a button at the top. I just figured, they had the tie to make it tight, and then they went, we should put a button there too.
And so that's a good point. Another thing that we're going to do in conjunction with this series, we're going to be posting some shorter form content as well to kind of emphasize, fill in the gaps of things we didn't have the time to cover. So some things that we're definitely going to do is, showing you how to get dressed. We've both worked in retail. We'll give people things to try on, and they'll be in the changing room for 10 minutes. They've never worn a suit before, or if they have, it's been years. They have to try to figure this out, try to figure all this stuff out. There's an order to put all this on to make it not, dreadful to try to put all this on. And a lot of people don't know it. For example, if you go on TikTok or Instagram and you see the, get ready with me things, you'll see a lot of people put their pants on first. And then they have to put their shirt on and stuff it in their pants or undo the fly. When in reality, you simply put the shirt on first and put the pants over it. And people don't know that in our retail lives, and they'll put the pants on and then they'll come out with the shirt untucked and like, could you tuck the shirt in? And so there's an order to all this and methods to do it conveniently. In
our experience, because I've done this, and Keller's done this with gentlemen who are getting married, right? And say they've purchased a very expensive American-made suit with Italian wool and all it's canvas and all these terms that they don't know, and they come out and they haven't put it on right, and they're having in front of their fiancés, they're standing in front of the mirror, and I'm having to correct it. Even to the point where I'm having to tie their shoes for them. Not because I'm being a blowhard about it, but I want them to really look their best. I want them to look proper.
Right.
And it's horribly embarrassing for that gentleman. And you don't want to be in that situation. I was recently watching a video here on YouTube of he's like a philosopher guy or whatever. And he's walking around town in a three-piece suit, and it's a very windy day. And one of the things I happened to notice was that the rear vent in the back of the suit is perfectly anchored to the rest of the suit on a very windy day. And I thought, he's talking about things of such importance, but his vents aren't moving because they're still sewn shut from the day he bought it right off the rack at whatever retail store, and those are things you absolutely must avoid.
But yeah, as Mr. Max was saying here, there's a lot of things that people don't know anymore. If you go back, 50 or 60 years when people were dressing like this every day, even kids, just to go out of their house, to go shopping or go to work or anything, people knew to do all these things to their clothes, like to unstitch that thing that man that he was referring to forgot to do or didn't know to do. And one thing that we're going to talk about a lot here is a disconnect between men and how they used to dress and what that kind of means about men nowadays and things like that.
That disconnect is important.
So that's going to be another motif. We're going to have the tradition that's going to be important. There's going to be a disconnect, and we're going to explain historically how that came to be and what that actually looks like and what we're referring to. And we'll get much more in depth into that later and explain how, you might look at it and how you might be interested in, getting back in touch with how men used to dress. But there's a lot of things that people just lost. And so we're kind of here to help bring that back because we think it deserves to come back and be reintroduced and help men, it sounds really high and mighty when we put it this way, but, get back in touch with their masculinity in a healthy way, not like, a lot of things on the internet. You see those, oh God, those alpha males or whatever.
Yeah, so, I mean, when we talk about masculinity, it's not about, necessarily giant muscles or chiseled physique, and those are all well and good, right? But not everyone has that. And the suit really is a garment that fits every single man. It can. It takes work and it takes a lot of knowledge. If Winston Churchill could look good in a suit, anybody can look good in a suit. And it's just about emphasizing certain aspects of masculinity, like being dashing, being chivalrous, being kind,
charming,
and generous. And those are things that we want to show that the suit is able to do.
And that's the masculinity that we're supporting and hoping people can embrace, We're not saying hit the gym 7 days a week to get gains and get ladies.
No, please don't do that. Please don't hit the gym 7 days a week because it makes it really, really hard to fit you into a suit because it becomes my job to do. And we'll talk about things like pleated pants. Be careful, gentlemen. Sometimes you paint yourself into a corner.
And so the point is that the suit fits every man. It was designed to do that. It's the clothes for a man, for any man. And we've had hundreds of years to perfect it, and every decade as social kind of values shift a little bit, the suit adjusts to reflect that. It's always a modern piece of clothing. No matter where you go, it's there to be worn by men and emphasize their features and their values and their philosophy, right? It supports a lifestyle that is healthy and masculine. And another thing we're going to do on this show is we're going to eventually bring in guests, right?
Yeah.
Because, the point is, when we really get down to the point of the show, it's beyond just suits, right? It's about the mentality and the mindset and the philosophy behind it. We spoke about getting, other cultures involved. Like, there's a resurgence in traditional Eastern Asian dress that have really similar principles, just expressed in a different way. And it's
the Hanfu movement.
The Hanfu
Very
movement.
beautiful, beautiful stuff.
And it's the same ideas, just expressed differently in a different culture. And so we'll get guests on if we can and things like that. And a lot of this also extends to women's clothing. It is different, and we can get into that later. But maybe
it's a touchy subject.
Touchy subject.
But we're not afraid to touch upon it.
Don't phrase it like that.
Perhaps not.
But there's a symbol, like we mentioned, the disconnect in the tradition, and it's there for women's clothing too. But you'll see it in different forms. And the reason that women dress differently than they used to today is for a different reason that men do. And so eventually we'll get some women clothing experts who've maybe focused on that more than we have. Because I think we could talk about it, but we'll have a woman just,
Yeah, we may do that as like an audio interview as well.
Because you can learn a lot from that stuff to see. Because I think, this is geared towards men, because we're men, and we've experienced that before. We have the male experience. We know all about suits. I've never worn a petticoat. But
or a camisole.
Right. But if you're a woman and you're watching this and I think you can learn from this, and you'll have to do some work on your own to relate it to your experiences and your clothes.
For any and all ladies who are watching, it could be very helpful for you to teach your gentleman the same things. He may not have the patience to sit and watch a long form discussion video about suit history, but or principles of classical menswear, but those are things that you can use to impress upon him, because ladies, you do indeed have a great deal of influence over what your men wear.
Please help them dress up in a nice way. A lot of times people will come in, a lot of times for weddings, fiancés will come in and the man is clueless. And sometimes the wife will be there, or the fiancé will be there, and she'll give input in a really constructive and a really, elegant way. A lot of times she will want him in the tightest fitting pants. She wants to see his butt. the skinniest little jacket, which isn't flattering for him at all. And so if you're watching this, you can gain some insight too into, elegant fashion, how pants should fit, so that way if he doesn't know, you do know. And you're not like the ladies who come in and just want to gawk at his hiney all day.
You can tell there's some bitterness there.
Mm-hmm.
But to kind of wrap up our initial video here, a little bit of homework for those who are willing to give our podcast a chance. We really, really appreciate it. We hope that you will like our video and subscribe to our channel or follow us on Instagram, whichever one that you prefer to watch it on. But a little bit of homework for you also is to just go on Google and look up old Hollywood movie stars in their suits. Particularly focus on the decades of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Because really that was where the suit kind of hit its absolute pinnacle in terms of beauty and elegance and cut. And watch some of those movies.
That period is, a lot of times colloquially referred to, in the classic menswear field as the golden era of menswear. And it really is. Gorgeous stuff and really fine-tuned elegance in those decades.
The suit is not a boring thing. There's a lot of variation, and we're going to talk about that just briefly before we wrap everything up. But you'll look at the fabrics, you'll look at the cuts of suits from that period and go, wow, look at the variety. Look at the way these gentlemen express themselves in subtle but powerful ways. It tends to fall off in the 60s, and then, the rest is history. But to show an example of how things are very different. So today I am wearing a very formal business suit from the late 2010s. So hence it's a very narrow lapel, the notch, a little bit slimmer pant, but it's got a shadow stripe in it. It's made from a bird's eye or nail head weave. And this is a very formal suit. I'm wearing black Oxfords with socks that match my trousers. And a very bright red geometric tie. This is a vintage tie from the 90s, I believe. Contrasted with Mr. Keller here, who is still wearing a suit, but it is a very casual suit.
So today I've got a linen two-piece suit. I've got an auto waistcoat. This guy, relatively new. I haven't examined it fully. We think probably around the 80s, perhaps 90s. True vintage. This is from a three-piece brown suit. This is a flannel.
Oh my God, you're wearing flannel with linen.
Yeah, kind of juxtaposed there, but I like the colors.
And then your tie is very free-form and very...
Right, if you saw the whole thing, it's a bit wild. This came in yesterday, so vintage.
Well, and that's why you can wear these wild ties, because you only ever see
that
much of it.
And so we have very different suits, expressing ourselves very differently today.
And your shoes are a derby shoe.
So much more casual look, and we don't think about this linen. Linen is great for the heat. It's been hot out here. We're based in Texas. So it's been hot these past couple days, and this linen is a great fabric for being breathable, letting that air come in. And because of that, it fits more loosely than Max's, business suit here, more formal one.
Yes.
And that lets the air flow. So all of these things have purposes. There's a lot of variety, and we'll get into double-breasted things and pleats and the different lapels. We're going to get all into
why all those things are. But for today, I think we thank you for joining us today and our pilot episode of Life in Apparel. We'll start figuring out some of the more, subtle details, a little bit different arrangement.
Yeah,
perhaps.
the set will change.
The set will change,
get bigger.
Little bits here and there. But we were just really excited. We really wanted to start engaging with you, the viewer.
So I've been Keller.
I'm Maxwell.
We're going to have a YouTube. We're probably going to get this on Spotify, the streaming platforms. We'll have an Instagram to put little clips. Wherever we put this, wherever you can leave a comment, please do. I think we're going to try really hard to respond to those and engage. And if you guys have questions you want answered, we'll have a look at that. And we're going to do our best to engage with you guys. We want this to be a conversation between us and also with the audience, right? Because you're who we're communicating to. We're not doing this to sell product. We're not doing this to, tell you to be more masculine. We're doing this to help you guys answer your questions. And, if you find us interesting, communicate our experiences and values to you, and maybe they'll catch on.
And
maybe
perhaps learn from you as well.
Yeah.
If you know any good deals on some good vintage clothes, always let me know. Thank you very much for joining us today. and we hope to see you next time.
Au revoir. You did good.